Artificial intelligence-powered mobile phone service that works offline is changing lives for thousands of Nigerians who do not have access to smartphones or the internet. And a Tunisian woman devotes her life to caring for injured pets. Watch World of Africa at these times only on WION. World is One.
The stress of our world can take a toll on our physical and emotional health. Here, in New York's Catskill Mountains, lies a luxurious place of healing called WION Wellness Center. The WION Wellness Center provides 500,000 square feet of natural methods to manage diabetes, hypertension, chronic pain, obesity, depression, anxiety, and other conditions. We use the traditions of centuries-old natural science from India, yoga, Ayurveda, acupuncture, and naturopathy in personalized programs that help you take charge of your own health. A minimum 5-day stay is recommended for best results. Book now at yo1.com.
Hi everyone, welcome to this week's WION VOA co-production. I'm Susan Tehrani, your host for today, coming to you live from New York City. We're going to start right off as we delve deep into preparations for the upcoming U.S. presidential elections. Analysts are warning that U.S. voters must consider caution and stay alert for foreign misinformation and disinformation seeking to disrupt the November presidential election. VOA's Veronica Balderas Iglesias looks at how Americans perceive the so-called influence operation threat and what the government and nonprofits are doing to help them fend that off.
U.S. intelligence officials are working around the clock to protect the November 2024 presidential election from malign foreign interference. But attempts to disrupt it using misinformation and disinformation are already taking place, analysts say.
To really try to increase polarization to undermine confidence in U.S. democratic institutions. And that can take the form of just social media posts really challenging whether democracy works. For example, if a foreign actor feels a certain candidate is not beneficial towards their geopolitical goals, we're seeing activity there to basically undermine those candidates.
Emerging technologies can help bad actors spread lies easier and faster, warned the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Democratic Senator Mark Warner, during a recent congressional hearing.
We have the whole new advent of artificial intelligence. AI brings at a scale and speed tools to interfere, misinform, disinform. I feel it's critically important that we do a better job in a bipartisan fashion of educating the American public that this problem has not gone away.
U.S. voters interviewed by VOA said they are aware of the threat. but acknowledged the challenges for individuals to discern truth from lies, particularly on social media.
They can use AI software in order to actually, disorient or, definitely change what a person is actually saying.
It's very difficult because oftentimes listeners aren't what you call critical thinkers, and they just believe what they hear on a particular platform.
Opinions vary among voters about how to tackle the challenge.
I think that there needs to be an independent party involved that can verify this information, because otherwise we're left in trusting these people or these platforms to provide us with accurate information.
I'm not sure anything can be done about it without really heavily censoring the internet and things like that. So I think it, falls on the individual to be an informed voter as well.
There are efforts underway to empower voters to fight misinformation and disinformation. The U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency told VOA in a statement that it designed the webpage Rumor versus Reality, where reliable information about the U.S. elections can be found. The nonprofit News Literacy Project also has several resources available to help voters discern fact from fiction.
The number one tactic of propagandists and other bad actors online who spread falsehoods and misleading information is to appeal to your emotions. So if you see something that you think is outrageous, that makes you fearful, it's always a good idea to just take a pause and ask yourself a few questions if there's any real evidence that the claim is true.
FBI Director Christopher Wray is among high-level officials who have addressed Congress on the issue. He says a more discerning public, combined with interagency and private sector efforts, will be essential to combat the misinformation and disinformation that aim to disrupt the November general election. Verónica Valderas Iglesias, VOA News, Falls Church, Virginia.
All right, for more on all of this, VOA's Jessica Stone is joining us live from the White House. Jessica, great to see you, and thank you for joining us. We recently saw New Hampshire voters file a federal lawsuit against the political operative responsible for disinformation in the primary election there. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting case, and it's likely to set precedent because this is the first time that we've had this AI-generated robocall given to thousands of New Hampshire voters, encouraging them not to vote in the primary with a rationale that they would then be excluded from the general election. Well, that robocall sounded like Joe Biden, but it wasn't Joe Biden, and the man behind that has now been sued by New Hampshire voters and also the two firms that are behind those calls, behind the distribution of those calls. They are seeking $7,500 in damages per person who received those calls. So the hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages at stake here. And the man behind it, Steve Kramer, he says that this was an act of civil disobedience, that he simply did this to show the dangers of AI. Kramer and the companies are also under federal investigation for tampering with elections. And interestingly enough, that the voice of that robocall is actually a magician, a street magician in New Orleans. Susan?
Very interesting, and that's a lot of money. Jessica, this week, the former director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy issued a warning about artificial intelligence and chatbots with regard to the elections. What did she say?
Yeah, Alondra Nelson, I should say, she's recently left the White House to go start something called the AI Democracy Project at Princeton University. And she's been making the rounds over the last few months talking about the dangers of AI. This group that she built, they created a survey of 5 major AI language models. So these are things like ChatGPT. And what they found is that more than half of all these AI chatbots are spitting out false election information, and 40% of them, they say, are harmful, releasing harmful information. Election officials say based on these chatbots, the data that they're spitting out is not a reliable source of information for voters. Quite clearly not a good way to go. So don't go to your chatbot for election information.
Oh, dear God. Yeah, definitely. Okay, Jessica, please do stay with me. I'd love to get your thoughts on our next story as well, where 5 U.S. states held presidential primaries on Tuesday. The presumptive nominees, President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump, have achieved enough votes to secure the party's nominations. Donald Trump voted in his home state of Florida. That's where VOA's senior Washington correspondent Carolyn Presutti tells us what that state stands on one of the biggest issues on voters' minds, that being immigration. Take a look.
You might say Lucy Sophie is a true mother hen, protecting newborn chicks near her store. Here in Key West, harming a chicken or a rooster carries a big fine. The French-American voted Tuesday as a U.S. citizen for the first time. Sophie was energized for former President Donald Trump, like most other Florida Republicans.
How they feel about the country, how they feel about belonging to this country, and you bring that pride to Americans. Maybe I'm not really very excited about his slogan, I will make America great. I wish he just can say, I will make Americans great.
Sophie's town of Key West, Florida has a party vibe, especially along Duval Street, packed with raucous bars and crazy visitors. Key West is the southernmost point in the United States, and 145 kilometers across the water is Cuba. Haiti just a little bit further. That's why immigration is such a hot political topic here. Since October, the U.S. Coast Guard has rescued and sent back more than 100 Haitians trying to enter Key West and southern Florida. That compares with more than 300 repatriated Cubans. Tammy Spurlock welcomes them, to a point.
I think they're absolutely vital to Key West. They keep our city beautiful. They're what keeps us going. Do I think that everybody needs to come in legally? Absolutely. But they are vital.
Donald Trump, who promises mass deportations if he's reelected, voted Tuesday near his home in Palm Beach, Florida.
They have to close the borders. Our country is dying. Our country is being overridden. This is an invasion.
President Joe Biden was not on the Florida ballot Tuesday. Instead, he was campaigning in the Southwest, where he criticized Trump.
Now he says immigrants are poisoning the blood of our country. What the hell is he talking about? No.
And some of those immigrants, specifically Haitians, are fleeing violence at home. But this first-time voter isn't making exceptions.
I understand that that's an issue, but it's still not an excuse to illegally break the law.
Still, at least one immigrant a day leaves home and braves the dangerous Florida Straits in search of better days ahead. Carolyn Presutti, VOA News, Key West, Florida.
VOA's Jessica Stone is still live with us from the White House. Jessica, we know that immigration is a key issue for a lot of voters around the country. During the presidential elections, even in the primaries, we saw poll after poll that immigration sometimes even topped the economy. But there's been no progress on a congressional border bill. States are now taking measures into their own hands. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, we're all watching the state of Texas right now, which is often a bellwether on immigration policy, because Texas has created and passed a law called SB 4, and it allows local police to arrest anyone accused of illegally crossing the U.S.-Mexico border, and it carries a penalty of up to 6 months in jail. If it happens again, it's a much longer prison sentence. But the Biden administration has challenged this in the courts, and they say it's unconstitutional because this is a responsibility of the national government, not the local government. The case went to the nation's highest court, and just this week we had a bit of whiplash because the Supreme Court said, yes, the law can go forward. Then a lower court said, no, it can't. And so right now, that law is not in play in Texas. It is on hold, but 5 or 6 states around the country are watching what happens with this because they too have either passed or plan to pass or are considering passing a legislation similar where they can use local law enforcement on immigration policy and basically usurp the power of the national government because many of them say that the national government isn't doing its job. Susan?
Yeah, and finally, Jessica, Tuesday's primaries gave us some indication of what trends analysts are observing. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, there were 2 major areas that political analysts were watching. Number one, they were watching this Senate race in Ohio, where an establishment Republican was up for the primary vote, as was someone backed by Donald Trump. And interestingly enough, and maybe not surprising to some, the candidate backed by Donald Trump did win. He's a wealthy former car dealer and political newcomer. Even despite that, he won narrowly. So this shows the power of a Donald Trump endorsement, particularly in a Midwest state that is very crucial to the national elections and is increasingly voting Republican. The other thing that they were watching is the fact that overwhelmingly, even though Biden and Trump continue to win their primaries in state after state, on Tuesday, 25% of Republican primary states did not go for Trump, and 17% did not go for Biden. And so there is this lingering feeling that both of them have vulnerabilities within their own parties going into the fall election. The question, of course, is will their opponents be able to somehow take some of those voters into their fold when it comes to Election Day in November? Susan?
Yeah, it'll definitely be one to watch. VOA's Jessica Stone joining us live from the White House this Friday morning. Jessica, thank you so much for all of that, and I'll see you next week. All right, we have some breaking news coming in from the United Nations, notably the UN Security Council. You may remember that the United States just this week put forth a draft resolution on the conflict in Gaza between Hamas and Israel. This was another draft resolution that was countering a previous one that the United States had vetoed, put forth by Algeria. We're now learning that today the Security Council finally voted on that resolution and it did not pass. It's once again failed to adopt this resolution. It would have demanded an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. Russia and China, both permanent members of the Security Council, were among the countries that voted against the resolution. The Russian ambassador to the UN saying that it was highly politicized. Of course, we'll hear more on that. They were meeting for this resolution. Just to tell you what the resolution was asking for, it was not only asking for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, but also an Israeli-Hamas hostage deal, basically increasing pressure on its ally Israel to do more humanitarian aid, do more about having that humanitarian aid reach the residents of Gaza and better protect civilians as well. Of course, this resolution comes at a time when U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in the Middle East trying to find a way forward. So we'll probably hear from the State Department soon as well. All right. Story coming in from here in New York City, where New York Attorney General Letitia James seems to be eyeing former President Donald Trump's assets in earnest. Basically, James is eyeing a possible takeover of the Republicans' golf course and private estate, Seven Springs. Trump's assets are under the scanner after his failure to acquire the $454 million bond demanded to cover the civil fraud judgment. The former president has until Monday to secure the required financial guarantee. Earlier this week, the former president's lawyers notified that he's facing what they called insurmountable difficulties in securing a bond. Over 30 insurance companies have turned the Republican frontrunner down. The judgment has put multiple properties of the former president at risk. Some of these include Trump Tower, a penthouse at Trump Tower, a hotel in Central Park, and numerous apartment buildings. So Trump's attorney, Clifford Roberts, has published and pushed back on the court's suggestion over Trump's handling over his assets. Roberts said the decision was impractical, unconstitutional, as well as unjust. However, the process of seizure will not be an easy one if it goes through. On paper, Donald Trump himself is not the owner of a lot of these properties. This means an order against him will not be executable on such assets. As of now, the Attorney General is looking to seize his bank accounts and physical assets through liens and foreclosures. All right, let's take you all the way to Canada, where the country faced a very unusual event recently. 2,000 earthquakes were recorded in a single day. Scientists believe that they hold a grim warning and that the ocean floor is ripping apart and ripping off Canada's coast. Our next report tells you more about this story.